Hey, it's Nick here from Greyscalegorilla, and in today's tutorial, I wanted to show you how to finish this rope simulation tutorial using Redshift lights, materials, and cameras. If you haven't watched part 1 of this tutorial, be sure to check the description below where we show you how to set up this dynamic rope simulation from scratch right inside of Cinema 4D. And with that, let's head on in and let's get started. All right, here we are in Cinema 4D, and let's make this render beautiful using Redshift. The first thing I'm gonna do is go to my Redshift layout. We have a YouTube video all about how to customize your layout. If you want to learn more about that, we'll put that down in the description. All right, now that we're here using Redshift, if we hit play, of course, we won't see much. That's because we don't have materials, we don't have lighting, we don't have all the beautiful things that help make a render look great. And that's what we're going to do here today. So let's get started right away. Well, the first thing we need to do is frame up our scene using a camera. So you can see we don't have our Redshift menu. And that's because we don't have Redshift turned on. So let's go to our render settings. Let's go to Redshift. And once we turn on Redshift, you should see a Redshift menu. If you don't see that menu, go to Edit, Preferences, open up your renderer, click on Redshift, and make sure that this checkbox is turned on. Redshift main menu. Once you have that on, your menu should show up. And now we have access to all the fun stuff, including cameras, standard camera. Once you click on standard camera, if you're using one of the latest versions of Redshift, you'll see this new camera. The first thing we want to do is frame up this scene. And the first thing we want to do is select the right lens. By default, we have a 35mm lens, which is great if we're trying to film rooms or trying to see something large. But we have this rope that is, if you think about taking a photo or a video of this rope, something you're going to have to zoom way into to see all the nice detail. And so anytime you have that feeling like you're in a studio and you need to zoom in on a product, you need to use different lenses. For this one, I'm going to use a 200mm lens, and this is going to allow us to zoom way in, see all this nice detail, and it removes some of the parallax that we don't want in this render. So I think our final frame is going to be something like this, or something like this that's kind of crisscrossing the frame here with all of this movement happening in this corner. So now that we have our camera roughly set up, how do we start to make the lighting and materials really easily? Well, for this, we're going to use an HDRI and an area light together. Let's set up the area light first. Go up to our Redshift menu, go to Lights, go to Area Light. And by default, the area light is going to be, let me click off my camera so we can move around without affecting our camera. By default, our area light's going to be way over here on the edge. We want it to be centered, so just drag it over. We also want to rotate it around so you can grab it and rotate. If you hold Shift, you can constrain by 90 degrees or constrain by 5 degrees. You want it to go to 90 and then let go. Grab your Move tool and move it up in the air. Grab your Scale and then shrink it down. We don't want this thing to be too big because we do want a little bit of gradient across this rope. Now, if we hit play, you're going to see a couple things. Let's go back to our main camera. The main thing is this light is just too bright. So select your area light, come down to exposure, and dial this down until you are getting kind of a brighter effect on the edge or in the center, and then it's going to be kind of rolling off. You want this bright effect here that rolls off towards the edges, and we can make that more pronounced as we go. But even with this light here, we're just not getting anything great. And that's because there's no materials on this scene. So let's hit pause and let's talk about the materials. If you remember back in the first part of this tutorial, we made our cloner editable to create complete separate sweeps for every one of these ropes. Now, this is great because now we can texture each one of these ropes separately. Now, if you're watching this tutorial and you're not a Greyscalegorilla Plus member, you can go up here and make a new material in the material settings and just make each one of these separate. If you are a Greyscalegorilla Plus member, I wanted to show you the brand new Paracord materials that just came out because they're built specifically for this kind of stuff and they look gorgeous. So let me open up the Paracord collection here, and you can see we have tons of different color combinations that are ready for you to drag and drop on any object. And these work super great with all these ropes. In fact, I'm just going to drag this one right onto the cloner so that we can see the textures all the way across all the ropes at once. And then we're going to select different ones for each rope as we go. So all I have to do now is hit play, and you're gonna see it is on the material. However, it's not scaled properly. Now, all we have to do is click on our material, go into our settings, and set our length to something way smaller, like 5%. And just like that, I'm gonna zoom in here because look at all the detail. Just like that, we have all this nice detail on all the ropes. In fact, at this point, I think we could turn up our area light just a bit. Not the intensity. I don't want to mess with that. I just want to crank the area light. There we go. Look at all that awesome detail. I think that's roughly the right scale too, this 5%. And if that's the case, now we can just adjust each of these ropes into different color combinations to get different looks. I'm going to leave this one here on red so that if we miss any, it'll just auto populate it. But let's grab a few other ones here that have some cool colors. I'm going to grab this blue one, and we're going to adjust all of them at once when it comes to their settings. So let's just go ahead and grab a bunch of different ones here. This black one might go well. I encourage you to keep it within some of the color palette. So, of course, I love these oranges and blacks. I'm going to try to keep that color palette here as we go through. Maybe yellows would work with orange. But just think about color as you go through this. If you're more of a blue person, pick more blue stuff. I love this plain orange one. I'm going to put that one on here. And let's grab this kind of tan snake skin kind of looking pattern. Called popcorn. I like that one. Let's keep going here. Let's go with this bright orange, of course. I think I got to scroll down a little bit just to see the final one. Nope, we got them all. So that's all the sweeps plus the original. Let's go ahead and just put this one right here. We should have 9 total textures, and we're good to go. Now, we do want to scale all of these properly, so let's just select all of these textures, come down to length, and hit 5%. Now, this works for my scene scale. Depending on your scene scale, if you followed along exactly, then everything should work fine. But what you want, if you zoom in here, are these little triangles, these little braids, to be roughly square. In fact, I think we can move ours up a little bit to 4. That might make it a little bit more square. There we go. That's the effect you want. You'll know when it's wrong if it's more triangular like this, more stretched out. So keep moving this back until you see roughly square braids. Then you know you're ready to go. So now that we have that, we can back out. We get beautiful interaction with all these ropes. So from here, I love this area light above us that is kind of kicking this bright area and it's falling off nice. But I hate how everything else is so dark. There's a couple things we could do. We could use an HDRI, for example, to kind of fill in the details, but you can also just add a little bounce. In this case, let's try the bounce first. I'm going to grab a cube. I'm going to move off of my Redshift camera just so we can move out of the way. And I'm going to put the cube down below our ropes here. Now, we don't want this in camera, so I just want to move it down. But once we go back into the camera, we should start to see a little detail down here bouncing off of that cube. And in fact, if we could pull up the position up and up and up until it's a little closer, as long as it's not in our camera, we'll get all this nice bounce detail. Now, take a look here. I'm going to zoom in even more just so we could see the effect. Here it is with the bounce. Specifically, look at the bottom. Let's turn off the bounce, and you'll see no bounce light, no reflections, no detail at all in the bottom. And we're getting this essentially for free just by letting Redshift do its thing, do its bounce thing. From here, we are seeing a little bit of stepping in our rope. So if we kind of zoom here, you can see some of the pinching that's going on. If you start to see this in your simulation, there's a few things you could do. One is go into your settings. You can hit Control D on your keyboard, go to your simulation settings and turn up your substeps. This will start to calm down some of the kind of kinkiness and bendiness of your ropes. You can also put your entire cloner, once you like the simulation, inside of a subdivision surface. And of course, this will add more geometry. It'll also slow down your dynamics and things like that. So you want to wait until you are happy with all of the dynamics and then do that at the very end. Now, Redshift also has the ability for you to add a Redshift tag. So if you come into Render, Redshift Object, you can add a Redshift tag to any one of these ropes or all of them and turn on your geometry, override, turn on tessellation. And from here, I would recommend you turn off screen space adaptive and you set maximum subdivisions to something smaller like 2 or 3. Now, I think if we add this to the cloner, it should round it out a little bit more across the board. That might be a way to do it. And you may have to put it on each sweep, depending on how much you want to control. So I did want to show you that if you're having a lot of geometry issues. For me, I think this is looking pretty good. Let's talk about adding depth of field to our camera. Let's go into our Redshift camera. Let's click on optical. And let's scroll down and you'll find these settings here. There's 2 settings that are super important when it comes to adding depth of field. One is aperture. This is the size of the iris of your lens. And if you've done photography or you're familiar with this, then you know that a lower number is a bigger aperture. And that just means more light gets let in. And the more light that gets let in like that, the more blurriness you will have in your bokeh. So let's set this to 2 for now. 2 or 1.8 is a very common basic lens setup that allows a ton of light in and helps achieve this effect. But we still don't have any bokeh, no blur. That's okay. All we have to do now is turn on this button. And boy, oh boy, do we have a blurry render. Nothing is in focus. And that is because somewhere in this space is the focus point of the camera, but none of that focus is actually on our rope. In other words, we have this camera that is just completely out of focus. Well, how do we tell this camera where to focus? Well, I have something I've been doing for maybe a couple years now that I use in every scene file, and that is a focus null. Go ahead and click your null. Let's name this focus. And inside your Redshift camera, you're going to see object. This is your focus object, and you want this null to be what it is focusing on. Once you have this set up, you now have the ability to do my absolute favorite thing, which is select the focus null, go to your model mode in your settings here, click on your place tool, and literally select wherever you want the focus to be in your scene, and it will be in focus. Look at that. Right here, the ropes are in focus. In fact, I want it to be right there so I could see this. That's in focus. What if I want this little bend to be in focus? Now that's in focus. Everything else is blurry. And it stays that way even if you move the camera in or out. Highly encourage you to experiment with this workflow. Actually really loving this scene as a still. Love all the colors coming through and all this orange and little bokeh balls here in the background. But now we have the control we need to set up our scene. So let's set up a couple different angles here, depending on what we're trying to go for. Here's one angle. Let's just hit play. And you can see we have this waviness coming from the front, and we have this twisting animation coming through the edge there. And it almost goes off screen, but then it floats around right there. I love this angle. So let's call this kind of like the sideways angle. Let's hit render just to test it out at different points of the render. I don't like how close it is to the focus there. I do want the focus to be further out. And this may be a little heavy-handed in the blurriness department when it comes to this kind of shot. So you could dial that back by going to your aperture and turning it to a higher number. If I go to 4, you're going to see less blur. And if I go to 6 or 8, it'll see less and less and less blur. You want this to be natural based on what type of lens you would use in real life. So this is highly dependent on what type of feeling you're going for. If you're trying to show off the product, you may want to turn the aperture up so that you're not putting your client or your customer's product into a blurry mess. And if you're trying to be more dramatic, you could turn it down and get more of that blurriness going on. But I love this look. I think this is just enough. Maybe a 10 would bring a little bit more into here, but I'm really digging this setup. Let's also go ahead and copy and paste this camera and set up another camera angle. This will be more from the side. I think this could be more of a zoomed out angle here. And let's try to find a great kind of place for the camera where the ropes really don't go too far off screen. I like this one. Let's go ahead and pause. and just see where we are in the render. Yeah, that looks good. I feel like I want to be a little bit closer just so it's more in frame. Let's also double check our focus. Yeah, that's fine. That's here in the center. This will give you less of that blurriness bokeh feel on your ropes, but it does give us a nice kind of straight across vibe. And this bounce light at the bottom, I feel like we're still missing a little bit of detail here. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of HDRI just to add in some of the fill light for these little edges. Let's go to Redshift. Let's go to Light, Dome Light. And if you have an HDRI you use a lot, go ahead and click this button right here and find it on your hard drive. If you are a Greyscalegorilla Plus customer, you can drag texture into drop zone and instantly have an HDRI link set up ready to go, which means you could come in here to HDRIs and click on any of these. Here's one of my faves here, commercial locations, creative office is good. Our new creative spaces HDRI collection is bonkers. I like this modern industrial number 10 if I need a little bit of a fill light. Like I want it to just feel like it's in a studio or a room. I love this one. I don't want it to be visible, so I'm going to select the dome light. I'm going to click off background, and there we go. We may want to tone that down just a little bit. Let's go to exposure and dial back on the exposure. We just want this to fill in the gaps. Here's with it, here's without it. You can see it's really subtle. If we turn off our area light, you should just be able to barely catch some of the detail. That might be a little bit too dark. Let's crank that up. There we go. And let's rotate it around just so we have a little bit more light popping in to the front. There we go. Getting kind of a side light coming through here. These are the subtle little details that really help make your simulations and your scenes feel like they're in real space, like you could reach out and touch them. Let's turn our area light back on, and that is looking really good. Don't forget, all of these small details, again, are what help you make a render that is feels like you could touch them. Beautiful materials, beautiful lighting, and well-placed cameras are the key in any render. Never forget it. Let's bounce back to our other redshift angle and see what we got. That is looking mighty beautiful. Let's fast forward here and just try to get another angle and see what we got. Yeah, that's a little bit off screen, so we may have to animate and track that camera a little bit, but I think this gets a long way to the original look that we're trying to go for. All right, now that we have some camera angles that we like, let's quickly talk about rendering this out. If we go to our render settings, we want to make sure that you go to your output, go to turn on all frames. In this case, we have 268 frames. If you don't need them all, you could turn that down. You do want to tell it where to save. I like using PNGs, 16-bit PNGs, just to get a little bit more detail in my final render. And of course, your Redshift render settings. By default, this is going to be set to medium. And honestly, medium is such a great preset for so many things. However, if you want to get a quick output, just click this to low. You'll see you'll have a little bit more grain. And if we turn on our bucket mode, you're going to see that this will give us kind of a close approximation of our final render when we hit render. The bokeh is not that bad. It's a little bit grainy. Again, if you're really trying to dial up and you have a lot of blurry stuff in your scene, you're going to want to turn this on to medium, but you will see how much longer it takes to render. I would say roughly twice as long every time you crank that setting up, but look at all the extra nice bokeh detail that we get. So very important that you set this correctly if you don't want to wait days for your render. And if you're just getting started, I encourage you to just start low, especially if we're working on a laptop or a smaller machine. If you got the juice, crank it up, baby. All right, from here, all you have to do is hit Shift R and it'll ask you, hey, you're not saving this, which I didn't save it. You should point this to a place on your hard drive to save it. And as soon as you do that, it will start rendering frame by frame. Let us know if you have a render from this tutorial. We would love to see it. Make sure you upload it and use the hashtag #MadeWithGSG, and you are up and rendering. Now, of course, the original render had many more ropes than this, but now you know all the techniques to follow along and build a complex, crazy rope animation all on your own. Thanks for watching, everybody. And if you made it this far, be sure to hit that subscribe button because we have hundreds of videos all designed to help you work faster and create more beautiful renders in Cinema 4D. As always, I'd like to wish you happy rendering, and we will see you in another video really soon. Bye, everyone.